does anyone have questions? Or did you learn everything you need to know about neuroscience in 15 minutes?
It was really hard.
This is like a good class. You know? See, that's what we need to bring alcohol into the classroom. There's a question.
Yes, what is the fundamental question in neuroscience that everybody wants to answer? Such as like in physics would be, what's the theory of everything?
So the question was, what's the fundamental question in neuroscience that everybody wants to answer? My answer would be there is no one fundamental question, but I think the big question is sort of mapping out the neural network. I mean, I was just at a conference now called Cracking the Neural Code, and it's trying to, what they call the easy problem of consciousness. So the easy problem would say is if we can map out every thought, everything, even just seeing the color red, how does that map out in terms of neurons firing in the brain? And that would be sort of mapping out the neural code. Once we figure that out, we crack that code, then we can get on to other questions, questions like how does that physical process translate into these sort of what feel like metaphysical perceptions? So right now it's sort of cracking this code.
Just wondering, how would you quantify qualia with that qualia scope as Giulio Tononi would deem it?
How would you
Can you translate that to English?
How do you quantify qualia? So qualia is really, what qualia is, I think it's a term philosophers came up with, is this just raw feeling, a raw experience. You know, the experience of seeing the color red, for example. And what Giulio Tononi is trying to do, this theory I talked about, phi, is to quantify it. He has a measure of the amount of differentiated, integrated information is a measure called phi, and that measure itself is qualia. So I think the question is, without that measure, how would you quantify qualia? Is that the question? I think you would just need another theory of consciousness to be able to quantify it. I mean, he threw that theory out there right now. That's the one a lot of people are looking at because that's sort of all we have. If somebody else comes up with another way to quantify it, you know, that we can test in the lab, you know, I think would be open to that as well.
Say one more question. Was there one over here?
But where does quantum physics play a role in this? Sort of switch to the chemical approach to psychology versus like the Freudian emotional, you know, approach.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so there are two different things. I mean, there's the chemical aspect of it, and there obviously neurochemistry is a huge part. I mean, I work in psychiatry. It's all about psychopharmacology, and that's a huge part of it. So when I talk about neurons firing, it's also a chemical process as well, and that's part of it. But quantum mechanics is something slightly different, and a lot of people have put the two together because the neural basis of consciousness is a mystery, and there's a space within quantum mechanics of indeterminacy that people say, well, that's sort of a mystery there, so maybe the two have something to do with each other. And I think I don't agree with that. There's a lot to go against that because the sort of the heat, the level, the temperature that's occurring in the brain is not the right kinds of temperatures for those quantum effects to really have an effect. So there's people like Steve Hammerhoff and Roger Penrose at Oxford who come up with this quantum theory of consciousness, which I think has gotten a lot of negative feedback, and rightly so.
That's terrific. Thank you so much, Heather. That was great.